Hi, I'm Chris Cooper. Welcome to the Family Plot, Gardening in the Mid-South. Thanks for joining us. Your landscape doesn't have to look tired and drab after summer fades. Today, we're going to talk about some great options for plants and trees that will add color and interest to your yard through the fall and winter months. All that and more is just ahead on the Family Plot, Gardening in the Mid-South, so stay with us.
This is a production of WKNO Memphis. Production funding for the Family Plot, Gardening in the Mid-South is provided by Goodwin's Landscape and Garden Center in Germantown since 1943 and continuing to offer its plants for successful gardening with 7 greenhouses and 3 acres of plants, plus comprehensive landscape services. International Paper Foundation, the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Hi, welcome to the Family Plot. I'm Chris Cooper. Joining me today is Lynn Lawhon. Lynn is a campus horticulturist for Northwest Mississippi Community College. And Jason Reeves is here. Jason is the UT Gardens horticulturist. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. All right, fall colors, Lynn. I love this time of the year, like to see the fall colors. So what are some trees for fall colors?
Well, in the South, we all want to have that New England look, but we don't have New England climate.
Right.
So what we have to do is we have to take kind of what does real well down south and breed it into the color. And so there's several different varieties of trees that we like to use to give us that October and November really snap. Probably one of the best of the varieties are the hybrid red maples. Okay. They are truly a good combination of some nice color as well as the heat tolerance that we've got to have when you're talking about July heat. The sugar maples are the ones that look so beautiful up north, and people try and can successfully cheat to grow 1 or 2. But in order to have something that's consistent in a place where you get the massive amount of color year after year, you really need to stay with these that are more southern temperature friendly. Okay. A few of my favorite that we've grown in the past. I love Autumn Blaze. It's a great kind of an oval shaped type medium growing maple, has some outstanding color, a little bit on the orange side, which is really nice. Red Sunset is one that's been around a number of years. It was probably one of the first successful hybrid maples to come out. Okay. October Glory was a great one, and is still used, and you can get a lot. I like the Summer Red too. That's one that's relatively new. The foliage that comes out in the summertime has a little red tinge. It's really heat tolerant, and it's really pretty.
Okay. All right. So what are the best ones that you like, though, for the most part? I mean, it's really going to show, the full glow of colors.
I would go with the Autumn Blaze. If I had a choice, I would probably choose it first, and then October Glory. Those are the two that are the most readily available that you can find at different nurseries and things, and 9 times out of 10 are going to be successful with.
Okay, and so they can handle our heat here and the temperatures here for the most part.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what about the ginkgo?
Oh, we love ginkgos. Ginkgo is one of the most interesting of our trees. It's got an ancient history. It's actually called a living fossil because it is there are fossil records that go back to the Jurassic period with this, and a native of China. Was introduced to Europe and later on in the Americas in the 1600s and 1700s. And it's a great tree, beautiful yellow color. What you try to do is you try to go for the male grafted because they are dioecious, which essentially means you got males and females. And not to be discriminatory or anything, we definitely like the males because the female fruit can be a little bit obnoxious. But nevertheless, they're beautiful for their color. Fall color is outstanding and a favorite. Once it gets mature, people love the ginkgo in the fall.
Yeah, and I know they have a huge ginkgo tree there in Jackson at the UT Gardens.
We do have a really nice specimen. We're fortunate to have it, and it's a male.
And it's a male. Okay, there you have it.
But it's so cool that you just kind of
real nice.
Yeah, it's a great, it's a wonderful specimen, and But there are a lot of them around the Mid-South, around Memphis, especially in the Chickasaw Gardens area and out of the Botanic Garden, that are magnificent because once they get some age, now they are very slow growing. When you talk about Jurassic, you're talking about a plant which takes its time. But interesting enough, there are not a lot of natural living predators to it. There's a good thing. I mean, insects, diseases, they're very resistant. It's just a slow growing tree. And as a result, you've got to take your time. It's one of those that you invest in the future.
Okay. Let's talk about black gum. What about that?
Oh, love black gum. Black gum is one of our natives that is probably one of the greatest show trees. It's not used as much in the landscape as it needs to be, in my opinion. There are some issues with transplanting, but professional horticulturalists have got that licked. And there's some really good varieties. But the black gum tree, interesting enough, it's got that great red color. It is the oldest living blooming deciduous tree. In other words, black gums can live up to 600 years.
Wow.
And although we don't have any around here that are 600 years old, but certainly in the bottomlands and some of the areas where it's indigenous, they can get quite large. But in the landscapes, we normally see them a little bit smaller, but a beautiful color and really a great tree, underused.
Good.
I might add that it's not related to the sweet gum. When I say black gum, people instantly think of those gum balls. So the seed pod on black gum is about the size of a dogwood berry, so you don't have to worry about that. And good for wildlife.
Oh, wonderful wildlife. That's exactly right. And it's another reason why, common names sometimes we in the industry speak the Latin so that we'll know what we're talking about. But sometimes those common names can come back and get you. But a great tree.
Right about that. Let's get to oaks. What about the oaks out there?
Okay, the oak trees. The Mid-South is filled with oaks.
Yes.
It does quite well here, and there are a few of them that we really, really like that I think are some of my favorites. I like the Nuttall and the Shumard oak. It's kind of that scarlet oak look. Readily available, easy to transplant. Both of those plants can be transplanted quite well. Has a wonderful fall color. And what happens so much of the time is gardeners or people will go to the same old trees and not mix things up. And so we advocate that if you want an oak tree, great, go with something other than a willow oak or a northern pin oak. And these two perform quite well and have a great fall color.
Okay, good deal. While we have a little time left, let's talk about the crepe myrtles and any other small ornamental trees that you really like.
Yeah, the crepe myrtles are just one of my favorites. It's especially the national arboretum ones, and I'm sure the viewers understand that if it's named for an American Indian tribe, then those are ones that were bred by the National Arboretum for fall color. Yeah. And so Natchez, Miami, Potomac are probably three of the largest in the Memphis area that actually are small trees that give us that great fall look, not to mention the blooms all summer long and an interesting bark in the winter. So it's like, a triple play of great interest going not only into the fall but into the winter.
Okay. Any other small ornamental?
Well, we love dogwoods.
Love the dogwoods.
Dogwoods,
right.
you can't go wrong with dogwoods. Certain redbuds can do really interesting things. I tell one that I like is a Chinese pistache, and it's one that you don't see very often. But boy, it's got a great color. It almost looks like the flame sumac, except it's in a tree form. And another one that you don't see a lot of in the industry, but it should be. And there's no reason in the world why people shouldn't be planting them because it's a great small tree.
Right, and I hear Carol Reese talking about that all the time because she's definitely advocating for that tree.
Absolutely.
Yes, we have a nice specimen at the Gardens in Jackson.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. All right. Well, thanks, man. We definitely appreciate the information.
Sure.
All right. There are a number of gardening events going on in the next couple of weeks. Here are just a few that might interest you. All right, Jason, Lynn just got through telling us about the fall tree colors. Now, what about winter interest?
Oh, there are a lot of plants we can add to our landscape for winter interest, and today we're going to talk about some of those and where to plant them and proper site selection, and then also using them in containers as well.
Good deal. Okay. All right, so you just lead us right into it.
All right, well, first off, let's talk about You know, choosing the right plant for the right place.
Yes.
So you need to do your homework ahead of time.
Yes.
You know, you need to, is it for sun or is it shade? Is it drought tolerant? Is it grow in a wet spot? So you got to figure out your situation. And then look for the plant that fits it. Or if you're like most plant collectors, you find the plant and then you figure out where you can plant it. So
as Liam's laughing over here, he knows about that too, huh?
Absolutely. So, you know, the size, you know, depending how big it gets, keep all that in mind and how it's going to mature over the years. So,
and I'm glad you mentioned that, Jason, because, you know, we get so many calls at the office. People just want a plant, but then it's like, okay, so where's the plant going? I mean, that's most important. So right plant, right place.
Absolutely. Okay. So, you know, again, sunshade, drainage, you know, make sure that's all going to fit in the size that you need before you go out and purchase the plant.
Okay.
So once you've done that, figure out the plant you want, you know, go out and look for it. And so I'm going to go through a few things today that you can plant this fall, and will add winter interest and interest to the garden for years to come. So we'll just start with some of the simple things. Like this is monkey grass. This is one called PD ingot though. So it has gold foliage. It doesn't look so golden here under the lighting, but outside it's a bright gold. A relatively new introduction, but PD ingot monkey grass really adds a lot of depth to the garden, and it'll grow in sun or part shade. If you get too much shade, it loses its gold foliage. So, but that works great in containers as well, spilling over the side for winter interest.
That looks good.
A couple little conifers here. You know, these are little guys that's going to get big. So again, pay attention to that label. This is Morgan. Morgan will eventually be about 4 feet tall. So it's an arborvitae. But you know, you look at this little thing, you think, oh, that's cute.
Yeah, exactly.
Stick it in the ground, and 2 or 3 years later, you know, it turns out to be a big guy. But this is great to put in a pot for a couple years. Or a winter pot, and then, you know, plant it in the ground in the spring, or you can even leave it in that pot a couple years. So, but Morgan arborvitae is great. Morgan actually turns a copper color in the winter time, just beautiful coppery color during the winter months.
And that's full sun?
Full sun, yes. And then another evergreen we've got, again, a little guy that I'm growing on for our plant sales, but this is called Good Vibrations, and it's a juniper, again, with that gold foliage. So again, this size, you might want to grow it in a pot for a couple years and then install it in the landscape. But most of your conifers, your evergreens, need good draining soil, so keep that in mind. And for the most part, they need full sun. Maybe a little bit of shade is all right. A couple deciduous plants that I want to talk about that I'm very fond of is red twig dogwood. And so this is a shrubby dogwood. It's not, it is related to our flowering dogwood, our Cornus florida, but the red twig dogwoods are really grown for their winter interest. Now, here we are in October, it's just beginning to turn color. So in the summertime, the stems are actually green. And as the cool temperatures come on, the color changes. So this is one called Winter Flame. There's Cardinal, there's many cultivars out there. But as the leaves fall off and the temperatures drop, it gets real colorful. Now, it is a shrubby plant, but to get that bright color, you need to cut it back every year or every other year. Once the stem gets about the size of your thumb down close to the base, it begins to become barky just like a tree or a shrub, and you lose that color. So you come in, I like to do it in the spring just before things leaf out, and take anything out that's, you know, big around as my thumb, just cutting it off near the ground. And then that encourages a lot of new growth to come on it. So adding a lot of winter interest. So you can plant this now in the garden, best in full sun, maybe part shade. And you can also use it in winter containers where you just stick it down in the container, and you'll see the pot that I've did out front here. But you just stick it down in there, and so it looks as if it's growing in the pot, but that adds you some additional color. The trick in the garden at Jackson is I cut a lot of these, and I actually bring them over to the building, and I put them in the ground in the beds right at the back door or back entrance. And as long as you stick them down where the points are all together, it looks like it's growing there. And so it's
pretty
a trick,
slick.
but it works great. And because those beds I don't want permanent shrubs in them, so it's a great way to add some winter interest. And then 2 hollies here. These are deciduous hollies, so deciduous meaning losing its leaves. These are winterberry holly, native. We also have a native possum haw. This is winter red and winter gold, and the winter gold is really more a salmon color. Now, all hollies are male and female, so you have to plant a pollinator to go along with it. And the pollinator for winter red and winter gold is Southern Gentleman. And so,
how about that?
And you only need 1 male for a group of females. You don't have to have a lot. So it is best if the male is planted in relatively close together. I mean, within 50 feet of each other. It's the bee that goes from one to the other that pollinates it. So you just want to be sure that bee visits the male and then comes over to the female. But the leaves will fall off here when it frosts, and you'll have these beautiful berries all winter long, unless the birds come along and eat them. So that is added wildlife food or the holly berries. They tend to prefer other things first before the holly berries, but again, great for winter interest. This is grown full sun, part shade, to average soil to wet soil. It actually grows in wet soil as well. So a great holly. And there's so many different hollies on the market. You know, a lot of native, non-natives, a lot of evergreens. So, you know, again, do your homework on some of those hollies. They end up being trees practically. So keep that in mind. And then just a little bit about our containers. The container in the foreground here is I just put together this morning for winter interest. You want to pick the right container. It needs to be something that's going to withstand the cold in the wintertime. So it cannot be a ceramic pot or a porcelain pot. It needs to be fiberglass or concrete or hypotufa that you may have made. So it can withstand that freezing and thaw. Plastic, of course, would work as well. So this is actually fiberglass here. And so picking that right pot is important so you don't break the pot during the wintertime. And then you see the assortment of plants I've put in here with the Morgan arborvitae. There's a mundo grass called black mundo in there. The yucca is color guard yucca. That works great in the container as well as in the ground. Very drought tolerant. And then also some added pansies in there for seasonal color. So pansies are always great to plant in the fall. And really, October, early November is the best time to get them in the ground. If you're like me, though, you're busy and you don't get them until Christmas time when you're out for vacation. But it's really best to get them in, you know, in early fall so they get rooted in really well before it gets cold. And if you don't, then depending on how cold the winter is, you may get a little more winter damage. But pansies always add a lot. And of course, there's kale and cabbage you can add as well. So, you know, fall is a great time for planting many plants, trees and shrubs, and you know, some of your annuals as well.
Yeah, it's a good time to be out in the garden.
Oh, absolutely. It's cool, and you kind of calm down from the summer, and it's a great time to be in the garden. Let
me ask you this question quickly. What kind of soil do you use?
If you're using a container, it needs to be a well-drained soil, you know, just a commercially produced potting media. You know, if it's less than $3 or $4 a bag, it's probably not very good. You know, it needs to be closer to $10 a bag. Because those contents really vary, and the cheaper the soil is, the more sand it's going to have in it, and the more bark. And the bark's not necessarily a bad thing, but also if it's really heavy, if it's a small bag and it's heavy, it's probably not very good because it's probably full of sand. And that's a filler. So the lighter weight, again, around $10 for an average bag is a good going price for good quality potting soil. So you want that drainage in the wintertime. Also, you got to be sure there's a hole in the bottom of the pot. You got to get that winter drainage. And if a pot sits real close to the ground, like on concrete, you may need to elevate just a little bit so that hole doesn't get stopped up so the water can run out during the wintertime.
All right.
And of course, don't forget to water it.
Yeah, don't forget that.
If it's not raining regularly, you got to water it.
That's right.
Just because it's cold outside doesn't mean the plants don't need water.
Right, and that's a good point. I think a lot of people forget that.
And that's true of anything in the landscape, not just in container.
Sure. Jason, we appreciate that information.
All right.
All right, this is our Q&A session. And Lynn, you jump in there with us now.
Sure.
All right.
We can do it.
Okay, here's our first viewer question and a photo from Pat in North Mississippi.
Oh, yeah.
I have this problem on a number of trees. What is it, and can I treat it? So, Lynn, we'll start with you. What do you think? And I think we know what this is.
Lichens, okay.
It's lichens.
It's definitely, and it's a natural thing. It's definitely, lichens are interesting. They're literally a cross of two organisms, an algae that come together with a fungus. And they live together and they work in a symbiotic relationship, a big word from Bob. But essentially they work together. They live in kind of a co-op. Yeah. And they're living on the plant, but not off the plant.
Right.
And most so, commercially speaking, if we were digging some trees in natural lichen, one way that we remove them to shipping is we take an old-fashioned grocery bag and you wad it up like a loofah sponge and you gently rub it on that. It will cut the lichens off. It will not harm the bark. And it's a nice natural way, but it's purely an aesthetic reason because lichens are natural.
They're natural, so it's no big problem. Jason?
Well, it's also, if lichens are growing, the air around it pretty much is clean.
It's clean.
So it's a good sign. You know, you're not going to find lichen in a highly polluted city. So it's really a good thing.
Yeah.
So. It just means you have a clean environment. That's
right.
That's pretty much what it is. And it's an undisturbed area.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so no need to treat it, Ms. Pat. You'd be just fine.
That's right.
Okay. All right, here's our next viewer question from Kay down in Walls, Mississippi. Okay. The needles on one of my beautiful 12-foot Italian cypress trees are turning rusty brown and dying from the bottom. So far, it's traveled up 4 feet up the tree. The disease started early this spring. I started spraying with a copper fungicide and liquid systemic fungicide in August. What is the prognosis for my tree? Any help would be greatly appreciated. Jason, we'll start with you.
Well, the first thing is the sample should be sent off to the lab in Nashville to get the problem identified correctly, because who knows what it is.
Yeah, and a photo would help.
A photo would definitely help, but a sample, so you can do that through your local county extension agent, or if they're in Mississippi, the local one there, so they can send it to their lab. And then once you've got a diagnosis, then you'll know what to treat with. Perhaps in Mississippi, the plant's okay. In Jackson, Tennessee, it's not very hardy, and we actually lost all of them this winter, the few that were in the landscape. So it could be some symptoms of some winter damage as well. And when a plant's stressed, then other things come into effect. So again, without a proper diagnosis, it would be hard to know for sure.
Okay, I agree with that.
Well, a couple of things that it could be, because like I say, you're exactly right.
Exactly right.
But if you go and you think about the Italian cypress, Phytophthora, which is the water moles, or something that's my number one suspect right off the bat, because the way she's describing it, and understanding that the Italian cypress tends to lean more toward the drier, arid climates. I mean, if you see the most spectacular ones are in Northern California and Napa, or outside the Roman Forum, I mean, in Italy. And so, although it can live here, sometimes it's just a matter of taking 15 to 20 years to die, and because they can live hundreds of years in areas. So that's probably the two things, and I would definitely not recommend, trying to treat it with fungicides. It's wasted money. It's not really the best thing. So, maybe if Kay can just send that off to the lab if she wants, but she may want to try to think about shifting to a different alternative plant.
And if she wanted to shift to an alternative plant, what would that be?
There is a relatively new eastern red cedar, our native eastern red cedar, called Taylor, that's very similar, very narrow and upright, and a great plant, very drought tolerant, but native to our area, so it's going to do well. So that would be a good substitute. There's also an arborvitae called DeGroot Spires that's also very tall and slender that would give you the similar effect that the Italian cypress would.
Okay. All right, Ms. Kay, there you have it. Okay. Here's our next question. When is the best time to plant strawberries? And Lynn, we'll start with you.
Okay.
Let's start with you, Lynn.
Now we'll jump it right over here. I think early spring is what I would recommend. I think that although fall is a great time to plant things, with strawberries, you're going to invest some time in them anyway. You want to try to get them going. It goes back to what Jason was saying with soil, preparation, and patience. And we have a tendency to want to get the strawberry shortcake recipe out before we actually get the plant growing. And so, but definitely you want to stack the favor in front of you. So that's what I would recommend.
I think if you can find potted plants, and I'm not sure that you can this time of year, but actually grown in container, you could put them in now. But if they're bare root, which you probably can't even find now, the bare roots are done late winter and early spring. All
right, here's our next question. How can I safely kill grass under my junipers without harming the junipers themselves? Jason, now you may have this problem.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, good.
There are herbicides out there known as Grass Be Gone, Select, and those only kill grasses. So you can spray it on the monkey grass because it's not a true grass. You can spray it on daylilies. Some people think they're grasses, but they're not. But you cannot get it on grasses, even ornamental grasses. So if you've got pampas grass or miscanthus or pennisetum, fountain grass, you don't want to get it on those. But you can spray around plants that are not grasses. And you should always read and follow the label directions.
It is
They're
on
there
there
for a reason.
Yes, it is on there.
But your local nursery or garden center will have those products. And we use those a lot at the UT Gardens, especially controlling the Rabuna grass from creeping in the beds and also in our monkey grass. So it's a great product.
Yeah, it's a good product. The Grass Be Gone does a wonderful job on annual and perennial grasses, for the most part. So read that label.
Absolutely.
And you don't want to get any of this on your foliage, though, because it will cause some discoloration.
Yeah, it can be some burn, from the surfactant that's in it.
I think it's fluazafop. Butanol is what it is, the active ingredient.
And you've got to be real careful, too, because we've run tests on that. If you will read the label closely, Procumbens juniper is said don't use it on that because it will discolor any of the low growing ones. And we've done some tests down at school on running different label applications of, really it's Fusilade is what.
Yeah, it's Fusilade.
The label Fusilade. And you have to do it real careful. So what I tell people is use it as careful as you would Roundup. Okay, not to get it on that, but it's more forgiving than any glyphosate because you get glyphosate on it, it's gone.
It's gone. Yeah.
So use Fusilade or any of those products with tremendous amount of care. Read the label and read the details because there are 3 varieties of junipers that will not work on. So you got to know what you're going to spray it on. So it is something, but it's a problem. Bermuda grass and junipers just don't get along real well.
Typically one application doesn't do it. With the grass products, it usually takes more than one application. So once it greens back up, it starts growing again, you would apply it again. Again, read and follow those label directions.
Read and follow the label, important lesson.
Yes.
Thank you, Ray and Jason. We're out of time. Be sure to connect with us. We'll send you weekly email updates about Family Plot. Just go online to WKNO.org and sign up under Get Local Show Updates. The email address is familyplot@WKNO.org. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. That's all we have time for today. Thanks for watching. I'm Chris Cooper. Be sure to join us next time for the Family Plot, Gardening in the Mid-South. Be safe.
Production funding for the Family Plot, Gardening in the Mid-South is provided by Good Winds Landscape and Garden Center in Germantown since 1943 and continuing to offer its plants for successful gardening with 7 greenhouses and 3 acres of plants, plus comprehensive landscape services. International Paper Foundation, the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.